Okay, in this tutorial we're going to take a look at animating our brick. So what I have here is a scene, and it's an old apartment scene that I created many years ago, and what you're going to create for this assignment just needs to be able to have some ledges, something up high, and something in the way for the brick as it goes down, as it falls over, to hit. Now, I have decided that in this scene, I'm going to put my brick up here on this ledge. It's going to fall down and it's going to strike the counter here, and then it's going to fall off that and strike the floor. And it's really up to you to choose something that you find entertaining. You could fall off here and hit that counter, fall here, hit here, all those sorts of things. I even have some options over here as well. So, in order to get started, of course, I need to bring in the brick. And I'm going to bring the brick rig in the same way I bring in most rigs when I'm animating, and that is to bring it in as a reference, as opposed to just importing it. And the reason why I want to bring it in as a reference is just in the standard way that one would animate, especially if you have complex character rigs, and you find out that somewhere along the way a change needs to be made to a rig. You don't want to be making that change while you already have some animation going in your scene. You might end up losing the animation. It might cause things to mess up, all sorts of things. You really don't want to get into those situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it in as a reference. And what a reference does is it brings in a sort of an image, like a copy of your original rig, except that there is still an original file that if that file gets updated, then the referenced version in your scene will receive those updates as well. It's kind of like if you're working in Premiere or After Effects and you update a video clip that's in one of those scenes, and then you'll find that when you open up Premiere or After Effects, those changes that you made to that video clip are automatically going to appear in your Premiere or After Effects file. So in order to bring this in properly, what I'm going to do is go to File, Create Reference, Options. And I'm just going to do it this way first. And I'm going to just say Reference. And I'm going to go and find my rig, which is the brick rig right here. And I'm just going to take the default options. Now when I bring that in, see it here, it's actually in the floor. I'm just going to go to wireframe view so you can see it. Right? Now, if I look at the naming that I have here, I'm going to find that the name is a bit odd. Now, the original name of this control that I have selected, that arrow control down there, in the original file was just brick translate control. But I will see that now when I brought this in this file, it's come in as brick_rig : brick translate control. And that is what's called a namespace. And we don't necessarily want to be changing the name of our objects, because we might have things that, especially scripts that get run in this scene, that ultimately you don't necessarily want there to be a change to those names, because those names are really important to make those scripts run correctly. If the names change in any way, the script will not run. So what I want to do is make sure that as I bring this in, I don't change the names. I basically want to prevent the namespaces from doing this. Okay, so in order to do that, well, first off, I am just going to go into my reference editor to get rid of this particular reference. I can go to File, Reference Editor, and I'm going to select my reference here. And I'm just going to say reference, unload reference, or I can also, I think that's probably just going to choose remove the reference actually. So I want to get rid of it. So there we go. Just say remove. All right, now that I'm in this reference editor, I can still do most of these things through here. So I'll just say File, Create Reference, Options. So in order to get around this, I'm going to say, yes, we're going to still use namespaces. And in my case, ignore the ones that are here. This is just from an old file, like I said. And it still has some information in here from that old file. It'll probably appear different on your end. But the thing I need to change is these options here. And I want to change my option to merge into selected namespace and rename incoming objects that match. That will allow me to bring in a reference that does not have an altered namespace. So we'll say reference, find our brick rig again, pops in, and check. And now notice just says brick translate control. We get our brick global control and just the brick in general. So that worked out pretty well. I can just close out of the reference editor, and that's all well and good. Okay, so now what I want to do is bring my brick and put it up more or less where I decide I want to animate from. I've created this brick so that it's the correct scale for the scene. Now, if you've constructed a scene, one of the first things that you need to do probably is to ensure that your brick is going to match the global scale of the scene. And if you want to do that, what you can do is grab the big red control around the brick, and that's where you can start to position the major location of the brick. Right now I can better see it here, as well as you'll want to use that red control, brick global control, to scale it. Right, so you can make it bigger or smaller depending on your scene scale. All right, you do definitely want it to be correct in scale, because ultimately that's going to be what more or less convinces you that this thing's a brick and not a box or a Lego. You know, just a couple different things that I suppose I could imagine it as. Now I'm not worried too much about where the brick global control goes, and I think that for the most part I'm just going to get it kind of close to where I would have the brick falling from. So I just popped into the top view real quick, because I actually do most of my basically most of everything that involves the initial positioning through my orthographic views. And I will also rotate it here in my Y direction. Now I just want to give you a kind of a cool heads up. You can snap your rotations to 15-degree intervals if you hold down the J key and then click on and drag your gizmo. So eventually I can just get it to -90 that way. All right, and not that it's actually all that important, but just because I am pedantic, I will make sure that I get this all the way down to the ground as well. So let's grab that global control and bring this down to the ground. There we go. Just a little bit too far in right now. Something like that will probably be good. All right, now I'm encountering an issue that often happens when I'm working in big scenes, and that is I am trying to orbit around my object, but I've kind of lost the my camera, I should say, is no longer centered around my object. And if that happens to you, and it will happen quite a bit, especially in a big scene, then just select your object or control around your object and press the F key. F as in frame or focus. And now your camera will orbit around that object, and even if you rotate away from it, or sorry, scale out of there, it'll still do that. Eventually it'll probably stop doing that, and you'll just have to hit F again when you select your object. So let's just go ahead and set this up so that we put the brick up on the ledge. All right, I'm going to now, instead of using the global control, I'm just going to go in and grab that translate control, the one with the big arrow on it, because this is the one that I use to handle most of my translations. And I'm just kind of eyeballing this for now. Bring that over here a little bit. I can decide, it's probably going to be easier to see if I just have it pop off of the top ledge here. All right, and so I'll put it sort of toward the edge there. And I'm just going to say one other thing that I can do with this is probably grab my brick orient control, and let's rotate our brick. All right, so I'll set that to 90 degrees there in X, and we'll rotate it 90 degrees in Y. And I'm just going to go ahead and translate the brick upwards like this. Okay. I could have probably gotten away with moving it in here as well, but I do try to keep the orient control exclusively for the purposes of rotating, and the translate control exclusively for the purposes of translating. But you know, if you find yourself all of a sudden doing it wrong, just keep track of how your animation is moving and try not to create too many counter rotations. Okay, so ultimately, in order to kind of convincingly tell this story, the brick needs to be sort of perilously placed so that it is just off balance a little bit, right? Somehow it's managed to, be placed right about here, and in a moment it's going to kind of go like that and fall over. So I'll leave it just off balance like that. And you can decide if you want it close to the wall or not. I'm just going to have it slightly tucked away. If you were going for like lots of realism, then you'd want to probably get this slightly askew. But for the sake of just doing a demo, I'm going to go ahead and make things easier. I'm just going to keep everything kind of nice and straight, sort of these 90-degree angles. All right, so that would be where I go in and say, this is my initial setup. And I'd probably want to save this. So I go in a file, save scene as, and I would call this my brick animation, and we'll call this, I usually call this something like start. Right, I'm just going to stick this back here. You can see I've already created some previous animation here. We're just going to create a new one called brick animation start, and I'll say save as. That way I know that this is always my starting file. And then I would go in and also make sure that under my save scene options, I have incremental saves enabled, which I do. It's also a good time now to go in and check my animation settings, my preferences. So if I click on that, that preferences window should be popping up somewhere here. I wonder if it's popped off the screen real quick. Let me just go have a look. Okay, there it is. And we're just going to come into our settings, make sure this is set to 24 frames per second. Animation is set to weighted tangents. I'm going to make sure my default in is set to clamped and out is set to stepped. And everything else there is probably okay. So we'll say save. Perfect. And then again, I'm just going to, once again, just save this as the brick animation start. Now, how am I going to go ahead and animate this? Well, I am going to go and do this as a pose-to-pose animation. I might have some planning that I'm working from. In fact, in this case, I'm cheating a bit. I'm sort of just using my own animator's brain to try to animate this. But if I were doing it correctly, I would probably be studying a little bit of reference, seeing how bricks fall, seeing how, they sort of move and how much friction they have and all that. But in my case here, just for this demonstration, which is slightly technical, I'm going to go ahead and show it this way. So to get that first series of poses, let's just say we're going to start here, obviously, and on frame 1, there we go, frame 1, I'm going to go ahead and key my my brick rig. Now, one of the things that we don't have at the moment, which would be of benefit to us, is a character set for this rig. And that's just going to allow us to be able to see where all of our keyframes are, regardless of whether or not our brick is selected. And I'm going to go ahead and set that up. Now, right now, in order to get a character set, I do need to drag a selection around all of the NURBS curves. And you see that as soon as I try to drag a selection around something here, I'm actually selecting the polygons as well. So I don't really want to select those. I'm going to go up here to my pick masks, and if you can't see this, it's probably closed, sort of something, an icon that looks like this. If you open them all up, you'll eventually find your pick masks. And this one right here is surface objects. If I select that, that will either turn on or off the selectability of any kind of surfaces, which includes polygons, NURBS, subdivision surfaces, those sorts of things. So if I turn that off now and I click anywhere, I can't select those. But I can drag a selection around other things like NURBS curves and select those. I probably should have done this before I put the brick up there, but it's no big deal. So I've now selected those NURBS curves, and I'm going to go into my animation menu set to the key menu and choose Create Character Set options. And I'm going to call this one, actually, I'll go ahead and I will reset the settings just so they're back to their normal settings. And I'm going to call this one brick. Now I'm going to say, let's just let everything be keyable. We'll take a look at all of the keyable attributes. And I'll say create character set. Now I get a character set down here in the bottom right corner. The benefit of this now is that whether or not I have any of the brick controls selected, I can still see the keyframes down here. Now here's something that's just happened. Notice I dragged this timeline, and all of a sudden my camera snapped somewhere else. That tells me that perhaps in this scene I actually have some animation on this camera. Now, like I said, this was an old scene that I opened up. I was trying to steal some geometry that I had in an old scene and save some time, but I might have had some animation in this scene as well, and it's probably important that I go in and find out before I start doing anything else, because that could lead to unexpected results. So if I go ahead and select my camera here, and let's just take a look at the graph editor. So we'll go into Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And let's just see if that wants to pop in here. Okay, there's my graph editor. And just making sure I have my camera still selected. And yep, I can see that actually I have some animation on here. And I can actually see it up here in the channel box as well. So what I want to do is I'm just going to come in here, select all those, and press delete. I don't want to be animating my camera. All right, get that back on there. Now, that means that I shouldn't have to worry about the camera moving anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to save my scene once again just to make sure it's nice and properly saved. And the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save it as a new version now. So I'll say save scene as, and we're going to call this brick animation, how about blocking? And I like to always use capital letters like this because it makes it easy for me to see what the different stages are that I'm in. So I'll save that. And now what I'm going to do is come in here, and I just got to reposition my camera again, press F to focus up on that. And that is my very first pose, really. So I'm going to come down to frame 1. And I want to select all of the curves associated with my animation here. So I'm just going to select everybody. Oh, I got to somewhere between what you see here and what you saw before. I actually had to restart Maya because I couldn't get my graph editor back, and that's why these things are not reset the same way they were. All right, so I turn the pick mask off again. All right. And I want to be able to constantly select that character set without having to zoom out necessarily. And in order to do that, I had to zoom out here. In order to do that, what I can do is I have that brick character set enabled. I can come to the animation menu set and go to Key and say select character set members. So if I deselect that and go to Key, select character set members, brick 1, it automatically selects all of those for me. So I could actually be zoomed up in here and not have to worry about trying to get back to that one that's on the ground. And the reason why I do that is that just my animation experience tells me that when I'm doing my blocking, I need to set a key on all of my controls, no matter whether or not they're moving or doing anything else. It's hardwired into me now. So I always make sure to do that. Now, instead of having to always come up here to the key menu in order to fire off that particular option, I want to just be able to click on a button. So I'm going to come to my custom shelf. So there's a little tab here. And notice that there's nothing in it right now, which means I can add stuff. I can add as many things as I want, really. And the first one I'm going to add is this. So I'm going to go to Key, and I'm going to select character set members and hover over brick 1, and I'm going to hold down Control and Shift at the same time, Control Shift, and left click. And that's going to add a little icon in here that is the same functionality as selecting that same feature that you saw just before. All right, so it does the exact same thing, but now it's just an icon, which is really helpful. So I'm going to select that. And now I'm just going to go to my key menu, set key, and I'm just going to verify what I have here. The defaults are probably fine. That's okay. And I'll press set key. So I have my first key created there. Now, this particular animation, due to the way I'm going to create it, is actually going to be animated in a straight ahead fashion. That is, I'm going to go ahead and instead of just creating a couple key poses in each place, I'm going to kind of work my way forward through the animation. I'm not going to do every key, but I'm not going to just go in and create a few key poses at the beginning, middle, and end, and then we'll go backwards. If that was confusing, I apologize. Just watch what I do and you'll get why I'm doing it this way. Our very next pose after this will have to be where this brick starts to rotate around this point here, which means we need to come in and grab this guy, the brick pivot control. And I need to move this exactly to the location where these two contact each other. In order to do that, I'm going to need to come from a side view here. Now, I got my other camera, my perspective camera, kind of in the way there, but I can just go to show and turn off cameras, if I can find them. Cameras, there we go. So no longer can I see them. I also don't necessarily need to see the grid here. So the edge, it's a little hard to detect, but if I were to turn back on that and click on this here, you could see that this edge, grab one of these edges, there we go, harder than it looks, is right here. It's at this confluence. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here a little bit. One thing I noticed just by doing this is that my brick is not entirely on the ground, or on the ledge actually. So I'm going to fix that before I do anything else. So I'm going to go back, and this right here is the select that control there, the translate control, and I'm just going to pull the brick down ever so slightly. Now here's a trick. I can't really see the brick right now. I can't really see the translate control right now because it's really high up on the front camera, right? It's up here toward the center of the brick. If I were to start trying to drag down in the perspective view and compare what I'm seeing in the front view, it's probably going to be a little bit too fast. It's probably okay, but if I find that I'm dragging something and the movement is a little bit too fast, for instance, so let's do a comparison. If I were in the perspective view checking this out, right, wanting to make sure it's perfectly lined up, and I was dragging it from the side view, you can see that it's kind of hard to control how much movement I'm actually getting. So I could, if I wanted to, make the controller here bigger by using the plus or minus keys on the keyboard. If I make that controller bigger, it actually will give me more control over the speed at which this kind of moves here. And it gives me a little bit more control. I could set it back down to a smaller size. So that looks like that is actually right where it needs to be. So with that diversion in place, I'm just going to go in, select everything again, and just press S. Now I'm going to come to frame 2. I'm going to grab my brick pivot control and pull this down. And I'm just going to try to align it precisely where these two interact with each other. So right about here looks pretty good. Doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it got to be pretty close. So that looks like that's where the rotation is going to take place from. Cool. And I'm also going to turn auto key on just to make sure that I start keying things automatically. Now, I'm going to pull back here, and I know that the rotation needs to happen from here. I can be in object mode if I want. I often like to do my rotations from gimbal mode, so I'm just going to turn that on real quick. And I'm going to rotate down. Now, I don't know exactly how far this would normally go. This is why having some reference would be good. But let's just assume at about 45-degree angle or so, that would be enough to cause the brick to fall off completely. So this right in its own right is going to become a keyframe for me. So I'm going to select everything again, hit S, and the very next keyframe I'm going to have is where the brick has started to move forward a little bit and move down. I'm going to start running into an issue here. This is where I pointed out in the brick rig intro that before I do anything else, if I've moved that pivot control, I gotta set that pivot control back to its original location, and that was by using a script. Now I gotta pop over here into my script editor, way down in the bottom right hand corner. And I need to load that Python script back in. So I'm gonna go and say File, Load Script, and this Python script came with your assignment. And we'll say brick rig, and that's that snap dynamic pivot, right? And as I also mentioned before, it's a good idea to get this script added to your shelf as well. So I select everything here in the Python tab and choose Save Script to Shelf. Click. We're just going to call this DYPVT, Dynamic Pivot. And I think that's a pretty good place for us to stop this video right now because it's getting a bit long. And in the next video, we will continue on with our blocking process.